Next presenter, Jerry Ratliff, went to the Erica DeVito School of Maintaining Time Schedules, or maybe vice versa. But thank you for that. I want to welcome Jerry Ratliff from Temple. We're going to hear a little bit from him about intelligence-led policing and strategic targeting. Then we're going to hear from Associate Deputy Director Pat McCreary from BJA, who's going to talk about the NSI, the Nationwide Suspicious Activities Report Initiative. Okay, so those are the next two sessions for us. I know Jerry will appreciate my attempt to summarize intelligence-led policing in 5 seconds. So he makes his way up here.
I'm up here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You want to go? I'm interested to hear. I mean, I can't summarize it in 2 days. There you go. No, that's fine. Okay. First speaker after lunch on the last day of a conference, and it's an academic. Yeah, it's going to be that boring. Yep. Right. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jerry Ratliff. I'm from Philadelphia. You can tell from my accent. I didn't want to be an academic. This was not my chosen career. I was a police officer from the age of 17, a police cadet in London, and then an officer when I was 18 years old. Spent 11 years in the job until I had a mountaineering accident ice climbing in the Scottish Highlands, which is why I'm now an academic. And as I went over that top and looked down 120 feet to a big pile of rocks that I was about to land in and snap my leg in half, I must have been channeling a future Joe Biden, because I remember thinking, this is a big fucking deal. So I've been an academic now as long as I was a police officer, and none of which is a good sign. But I'm just going to try and, in 30 minutes, try and summarize what intelligence-led policing is and where it came from, and try and give you an example. For the other speakers who have been up here, you know that CNA tries to slot a couple of those slides in they think you really should know about. So they're in the handout. Yeah, there's one. There's another one. Good. Did you enjoy them? There they go. Now, what I want to talk about actually is why we need intelligence-led policing. It's fine to have wonder how we use a police officer like this doing a stop on the street, and it really has its origins going back some way. When and this is a quote not from me, but from one of the most senior police officers in the UK, Sir David Phillips, who said, "Commanders are strong and sometimes sorry record of relying on their preconceptions rather than the current and measured appraisal of the problem in hand. Strong leaders can be personally effective but strategically weak." And this originated then in thinking in the 1990s, and Kent Police were really one of the leaders in pioneering and thinking about using a much more offender-focused approach to intelligence-led policing. And one of the reasons that it came about is because, and these figures are very similar, these are actually British figures, but the US figures are very similar. From 1970 to 2004, the number of police officers available relative to 1970 available for work on the streets of Britain increased by 50%. But the amount of work they had to do, the amount of recorded crime they had to deal with, if you can see the chart at all, shows that the actual increase in recorded crime was up to 250%. So this demand gap between the availability of police resources and the requirements for what they had to do was huge. And I joined the job in '84, which is about here. And already then, you meet those bitter and twisted old bastards who go, "Oh, this job ain't what it used to be." And you just think, "Yeah, you old cynic." Actually, they were right. They were right. The job had changed, and it just got worse thereafter. So there was this realization that the demand gap was changing the nature of policing, so that we had to think much more about how to use our resources. A second thing that's changed and driven intelligence-led policing is this. Anybody remember this? Yeah? Remember, this is how we used to... let me see if I press the right button here. Hold on a minute. This is how we used to store data. Remember? We had no idea what was going on. You could just BS your heart's content. Nobody had any idea what was going on, even within individual agencies. And remember how we used to share information? Does this sound familiar? Great! Wasn't that fabulous? When you heard that noise, you knew that in 40 minutes time you could download one pornographic picture. So that's how we used to store information, and that's how we used to move it around. Well, now even the smallest police department have banks of servers, banks of information. We actually are not information poor anymore, we're information rich. In fact, we've got far too much of it. So the aim is to try and make much more sense of it. How many people in this room will honestly say they read every line and every word of every email and BlackBerry message they get every day? You lie like a cheap Japanese watch. I don't believe you at all. And I know you don't read them because you never respond when I send you one. Bloody hell. What we are, of course, has got far too much information. Far too much. The challenge is to turn all of that volume of information into intelligence and crime reduction. So what that's driven, of course, is far more oversight. A number of the agencies here, I know you can go online, they're looking at maps of crime, the community can look at the maps of crime, the mayor can see what's happening yesterday and today and last week. So that's driven so much more oversight that we have to be answerable to. Those decisions can't be winging it like we used to, but now the decisions have to be much more objective and justifiable for the inevitable inquiry at some point when something goes wrong. Why did you choose to do that? So this is driving so much more sort of reactive and defensive approach to how we look at information, because we're so much more accountable. And finally, it's a degree of this, but it's not. Does anybody recognize these guys? Yep. They are the London bombers, yeah. This is, and it's not about IT. This is, people think that CCTV cameras, just such as this one, the backbone of what intelligence-led policing is about. It's not like that at all. And it's not about terrorism. Most people in this country have heard of 9/11 have heard of intelligence-led policing since 9/11. But actually, one of the first driving reports that sort of really drove things along. So we've got these four general sort of drivers for intelligence-led policing. But one of the early reports was actually from a financial body, the Audit Commission, who looked for best use of resources from public organisations in the UK, a fiscal body, who identified a report called Helping with Inquiries Tackling Crime Effectively, that existing police roles and the level of accountability lacked integration and efficiency. There would be a greater emphasis on tackling criminals rather than worrying about the crime, and the police are failing to make the best use of resources. Sound like a critique that's often passed around these days? Well, that was written in 1993, long before 9/11. So there's been a lot of development in intelligence-led policing since 1993. It's picked up pace in this country since 9/11. I did say I'd try and define it. I'm going to try and define intelligence-led policing. For the police officers in the room, my apologies. I was a cop for 11 years until I had an accident. I'm an academic now, so I use long-winded sentences and jargon where otherwise I would have been quite erudite. However, even though I'm going to use some jargon, there probably isn't going to be as much jargon as there is in this presentation I saw in the UK recently.
This afternoon, officers from this station, CID officers, led by Detective Inspector Grimm, i.e. me, will deploy ourselves operationally in a suspect arrest scenario vis-a-vis and apropos of a terrorism containment action in conjunction with operatives and personnel from special forces.
And for those English speakers among us,
me and Special Branch are going to nick a mad bomber.
Okay, so I can't be that quick about it, but what are we talking about here? Yeah, well, there's a word to scare everybody away, managerial philosophy. But what I really want to, and the idea being that this can't be, I'm going to have an intelligence-led policing unit, but everybody has to get on board. Because when we compartmentalise things, there's people have probably got lots of experience in the room. When we have a little unit that does that, everybody else goes, poof, that's their job, not mine. But really it's a business model for managing the strategic and the tactical information that flows around the agency. And there are many ways to address this. I consult with a number of police departments for a number of days, so squeezing into 30 minutes, I just want to focus more on the strategic thinking because that's the piece that's missing. And here's where the challenge is. It's combining data analysis and crime intelligence, and I use the word crime intelligence, not criminal intelligence, I'll explain in a moment. And this will be the hardest part for any agency to make this actually work, pivotal to an objective decision-making framework. Because a lot of the time there is very little objectivity and very little clarity as to what is the decision-making framework. I've worked with agencies, the decision-making framework was whoever was the last person to speak to the chief. Or whoever smokes, because the chief smokes and you go outside for a cigarette and you have 8 minutes of free time with the chief to influence their thinking. Or whoever happens to share a ride down to the train station or something like that. The decision-making framework is hugely important for bringing some consistency into driving how good decisions are made. And in many places that's simply lacking. It facilitates not just going out and arresting a bunch of bad guys. Crime and problem reduction, disruption, and prevention. There's people focus on the fact that they hear the words in intelligence-led policing, they hear the words intelligence. They don't really pay so much up to leadership and policing. And it's about using information intelligence to drive good decisions about resource allocations. And through, finally, both strategic management and effective enforcement strategies that target prolific and serious offenders. And the reason to include strategic management in there is because the value you can get when you have an opportunity to arrest a prolific offender. A lot of the time we just do an investigative interview that will get sufficient evidence to make a conviction and to prosecute a case. We never learn what weakness that offender was exploiting. But if that offender is exploiting some sort of a weakness, anything from a gap in financial regulation or to the poor design of homes on a housing project, at some point they'll be released, or somebody else will figure out that weakness. So we don't do enough to learn from investigative interviews of serious and prolific offenders what weakness they're exploiting, and then use problem-oriented policing to actually shut that weakness off permanently. So that's why the talk there is about strategic management. Sorry, Mike, it's really just code for problem-oriented policing. But they work hand in hand, I think. Is it achievable? Well, you know, I've seen these inspirational posters around so many police departments. There's a great bunch of them over in LAPD. Ah, marvelous. You go to the college there and it's all like, you know, a picture of some eagle and some quote about leadership or a bunch of guys rowing and some BS about teamwork. Well, my slides are a little bit more realistic. Failure, when your best just isn't good enough. But if we're not going to fail at this, what are we doing? Well, why am I calling it crime intelligence? Well, it's because we tend to focus in intelligence-led policing on criminal intelligence only. But there's a blend of two things that are needed. Crime intelligence is a term I use because I get bored trying to say to people crime analysis and criminal intelligence, which we often separate. But it's to try and explain it as simply as possible. We can stare at maps of crime, as my good colleague Liz Groff, who's here, can do, and we can understand what's going on. Crime analysis will tell you what's going on. It'll show you where the hot spots are, it'll show you where the hot times are. But hotspots can be caused for all sorts of different reasons. People think that hotspot analysis, it just shows you the end result. It's the starting point of an analysis. It shows you where you've got a problem, but it doesn't tell you what the problem is. This will tell you what's going on, but you need to go out and get criminal intelligence, interviews with offenders, talk to CIs, figure out why you've got that hotspot there. In a map of time, if I get the time to Camden, New Jersey, that has 6 crime hotspots, 6 drug hotspots, and they're all caused by different things. Okay, this is something that some people will be able to read, other people won't, but don't worry about it. It's in that big book of handouts, including which, by the way, are a couple of the slides that I thought were really lame, so I took them out this morning on the train, that answer some of the questions that you have. There are 3 questions on intelligence-led policing. 2 of them are in the answer there, and 1 of them I'll get to in a moment. But this chart is in there, and I'm not going to waste 5 minutes talking about it, because you're all smart people and you can read. But this is a very simple and superficial attempt to try and show some daylight between these various strategies. I'm not a big fan of community policing. I think the tenets are absolutely fine, but the delivery is, yeah, good luck with that. ComStat drives a lot of short-term thinking, so the ones I like to concentrate on are the 2 that I think mesh very well together if done well, intelligence-led policing and problem-oriented policing. But if I was going to concentrate on trying to find some daylight between them, I would concentrate on who determines the priorities and what is the criteria for success. This is trying to take large policing innovations that people have written dozens of books on and compress them into one PowerPoint slide. Trite doesn't really cover it, but it is an attempt to try and find some distance between these. Stare at those at your will, but I would suggest that you think about who determines the priorities for what you want to do and what are the criteria for success. Which is why I think there's a big push within the Smart Policing Initiative, at least, for problem-oriented policing and intelligence-led policing, rather than community policing. Because while I think community policing's tenets and aims are laudable, I think it's the people in the room and it's the police departments that have the holistic view. Hildy was up earlier and spoke about the range of other people to bring around the table, and I looked at that list of the community and NGOs and all those people, and I thought, As I looked at that, the only objective voice in the room is the police. They're the only ones that don't have an axe to grind or some agenda to push. They're the only, remember in my definition, objective decision-making framework. So, how would we think about that? Or not? For anybody who's done any work working with intelligence analysts, you'll hear about the intelligence cycle. It's in some of this stuff that gets pushed around. Some of it's good, and some of it I'll leave you to make a decision on your own. This is what we train intelligence analysts for. If anybody's ever seen it, completely ignore it. It's completely unrealistic. It is the tenet of training for all intelligence analysts, and it just doesn't happen this way. Most analysts don't get any direction from leadership. So they spend a lot of time just trying to guess what everybody wants, and they screw around down here doing lots of collation and analysis. They send stuff out, and they never get any feedback and review. It's completely unrealistic. And in terms of sending stuff out, you know that people aren't getting any direction when you have intelligence and crime analysts who send you lots and lots and lots of stuff. We talked earlier about that. I talked earlier about that information overload, that kind of BS about stuff. People send out daily bulletins. Daily bulletins, some even more so. I try and tell analysts to send less out so that people actually pay attention to it when it arrives. If nobody in this room actually reads all of their emails and all of their messages, we don't need to increase the volume of communication. We need to improve the quality of communication. Send less, but make it more meaningful when it gets there. So, in terms of doing that, here's a model for intelligence-led policing I would hope that to think about. Here is the criminal environment, which is, oh thank goodness they're there, because without them there we'd all be unemployed. And here, you can call this whatever you like, don't get hung up on the name. This is analysis, it's intelligence, it's, you know, it can be research and planning if you want. But most places all that happens is this is the first eye, they interpret the criminal environment. And analysts are great, they spend the whole time doing that sort of stuff. But that's not the job, that's some intelligence, but there's no leadership, and there's no policing. So we get better when analysts actually identify a decision maker and try and produce things that influence their thinking. And I don't mean to sound that in the pejorative Machiavellian sense, as a good academic phrase, but actually trying to think of helping decision makers understand what the long-term strategic goals are. But we still don't have any policing in terms of intelligence-led policing until the decision maker actually goes and has an impact on the criminal environment. And that's the core of all of this, which is whatever you're doing, that's all really nice. Did it work? Did it reduce crime? We do all sorts of other fluff around the edges, but did what you just did? Did it work? That damn free British healthcare system team was right. Did it reduce crime? Okay, I was asked to talk about strategic targeting, hotspots and offenders. This is the sort of thing that's a good starting point. This is Camden, New Jersey, in the Dillard Little Paradise, minutes drive from Philadelphia, the most dangerous city in America, and certainly the most entertaining to work in for a bit. You see a couple of drug hotspots, not a lot going on, but we focus too much on the spatial of hotspot, and we don't focus enough on time. The clock in the top right-hand corner is showing 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. Look at that. Drug hotspots opening at 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning. You've got to admire that work ethic. Listen, I can't get that out of our graduate students. We're paying them. The drug methadone clinic opens here. So with that starts up at 9. We have a bit of a siesta in the afternoon because it's hard working a long day on the drug corner. So the kids come out of school about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then things really pick up. They'll work through to midnight in Camden. So in terms of thinking about hotspots, try not to think too linearly. It's a starting point, but it's merely an indication of where you're likely to get the best bang for your buck in terms of investing your resources. But it's not the end point. Don't settle for, I've done a hotspot map, thank you, my job is done. I did a hotspot map the first day. Now the job starts. How do I really understand what's going on in here? And how are we going to implement some long-term, intelligence-led and problem-oriented solutions? So, there's the slide there. Shouldn't be there, but there we go. Right. Once you've got that, that gives you an idea of where to start. In terms of targeting offenders, in the 11 minutes I've got left, I'm not going to go through all the long, boring research that says targeting a few offenders is largely successful in reducing crime, not targeting every offender. Let's face it, nobody has the spare jail capacity anymore, do we? It's not like you ever go to jurisdictions that say, we've got like 50% space free in the jail, let's just bring them all in, this is great. Nobody has that. So let's target the specific offenders who are causing the most harm. It's a good starting place with this, and this is why we structured to some degree the part of our work with the Philadelphia Police Department, is that we're identifying target areas, not based on who are the offenders that live in that area, but who are the prolific offenders who are committing crime in that area. Because that is something that we have more chance of measuring. That's something that we want to do. So we're taking a sort of strategic harm approach in that regard. And in terms of what I'm talking about there is establishing the priorities for strategic criminal intelligence gathering and analysis based on the notions of the social harm caused by different sorts of activity. And Hildy's presentation earlier talked about bringing in other players such as the health department, which isn't a bad idea. Completely unrelated, just when I was saying that, I just remembered the 3 questions that you had about intelligence-led policing. 2 are in the handout, and I can't remember the answer. The other one was in that 3I model. Can I just stress that again? How important it is for the analyst to work and think about the relationship with the decision maker. I just want to stress how important that point is. Because what we're trying to do is understand this. Anybody tell me what's going on here? Scoring a touchdown. Marvellous. It is. And do you know which team it is?
What team? Dallas?
Dallas. Oh my goodness. You were doing so well. Your credibility was there and then through the ball. Anybody help her out? Eagles. Oh my goodness. Right, it is actually, even though they're scoring a touchdown, it is the Philadelphia Eagles snatching defeat from the jaws of victory as usual. Now, you were able to tell that by looking at one simple photograph. But let me tell you what it looks like from somebody who, if you've never seen American football before, it looks like some guy is doing that Olympics gymnastics thing on the horse where they do that stuff, but they've stolen the horse. He's about to impale himself on that red wooden thing that looks really painful. Everybody else is a bit tired and taking a lie down, and there's some guy with hemorrhoid problems dressed like a zebra in the back who doesn't appear to be playing any part in whatever's going on. Let me try it again then. What's going on here? A corner kick. Marvellous. And where is that corner kick going to be? A short pass, or is it going to be swung into the 6-yard box?
Long.
How do you know that?
Because it's all wound up.
It's all wound up. You were able to look at a photograph of less than 1%, a snapshot of less than 1% of the pitch, and one single player, and you were able to tell what was going on. And the reason being because you have insight and understanding, you understand the rules and the tactics and the objectives of the game. And as a result of that, you were able to plan where you would put your defenders, I take it, around the 6-yard box. That's what this whole notion of addressing crime analysis and criminal intelligence is about. Not just what's going on, but why, so that we can plan prevention activities. So, if I were to pick on 5 things, these are in your handout. 8 minutes to talk about Canada. Know and target the worst offenders, merge crime analysis and criminal intelligence, integrate it into decision making. So if it's not integrated into decision making, it is a waste of time. Set those strategic priorities, work with those partners if they're appropriate, that Hildy talked about, and focus on what's causing the most harm. And in this particular case for this grant, we'll be talking about violent crime. I'm going to talk about Camden. You can come to my website, jratliff.net, and download some papers that talk about this. In case any of you are geographically embarrassed, in the last 7 or 8 minutes I'm going to talk about Camden, New Jersey. That's America. We're on the East Coast. Washington, D.C., Manhattan and New York, Philadelphia's here, and just across the Ben Franklin Bridge from Philadelphia is the idyllic paradise of Camden, New Jersey. A delightful little spot. This is what it looked like in its heyday, just after the Second World War. A place of good schools and monuments and museums and investment and all sorts of wonderful things and lots of industry. But if you send jobs overseas for about 50 or 60 years and you don't do anything about it, the most dangerous and the poorest city in America ends up looking like this. Handy place to study, though, about a 6-minute drive from my home address. The statistics about Camden are quite shocking. Less than a third of children entering kindergarten will graduate from high school. And in terms of poverty, probably the most interesting one is the bottom there. More than 20% of people live in households in extreme poverty. And a household in extreme poverty is a household of 3 people with a collective income of less than $7,800 a year. So the homicide rate is spectacular, 80,000 people, about 50 homicides a year. But my favourite quote is from Maxim magazine that said, if the Grim Reaper had a favourite vacation spot, it would be Camden, New Jersey. If you're wondering what the place looks like, it looks like this. People living next door, trying to eke out an existence next to burnt-out homes. If anybody's seen The Wire, you know what happens behind all the gang tags on the boarded-up properties. Open-air, visible drug dealing. There's a lot of competition, so it's a service economy. They come out to you right underneath the drug-free school zone sign, which was kind of amusing me. Just queuing up cars in many places to buy drugs. A lot of violence associated with it and so forth. Burnt-out premises again, nice homes, a lot of just open-air, quite clear drug dealing going on in many regards. Quite a tricky place to work. I'm in an unmarked car with a captain, a uniform officer driving around. So I'm videotaping, and he's in full uniform, which means that when we turned up on the worst drug corner in the city, we were quite surprised to see probably also the worst lookout in North America, which is this guy here. So he finally sees that we're videoing about, oh, come on, mate. Now, there we go. Tells his friend and tells his mate on the push bike who covers his face, which is interesting when you're riding a bicycle in traffic. So it's a bit of a challenge there, I've got to be honest with you. And even though the city is 50% black and about 40-something% Hispanic, no drug market in Camden is really complete without the obligatory skanky white dude on the push bike. They kind of get issued with them, I think. Right. So, what are we talking about here? Well, we can map the levels of crime, and we can do the hotspot maps and look at property and violent crime, and there are clear hotspots. And you saw that before. And there we go. But what we were interested in is combining that crime analysis and criminal intelligence. We were able to actually map, as a result of our intelligence friends, where all the drug corners were. We identified drug corners where there were no gang activity, where it was dominated by and owned by one gang, and where what we call disputed corners. These are corners that have been owned by more than one gang. These are corners that have changed ownership over a kind of 1 or 2 year period. What's interesting is drug corners are well worth tackling. If you look at the intensity of crime around the non-gang corners compared to these dominated corners, these corners actually owned by these particular gangs over a long-term period, you get slightly higher burglary around the drug corners. You get a lot higher robbery around them, and in terms of tackling violence, wow, drug corners are well worth paying some attention to. But simply targeting the drug offenders isn't sufficient, because when we looked at, I'm just going to skip ahead to looking at the violent crime here. These are statistics called incident rate ratios, but what it basically means is when you move from a non-gang corner to a dominated corner, you get a 110% increase in violence. But when you move to a disputed corner, you get a 36% increase in violence again. And the problem there is the simple idea that the police department have of going out and just tackling drug guys and taking them off the corners would actually have created disputed corners. It would have created the problem that, and disputed corners increase the level of violence. So it's not just a matter of going out and pulling these guys off the corners, because the corners are hugely valuable in Camden. So we thought about trying to, in terms of thinking about stopping the violence, we thought about trying to do something that was done in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is the similar sort of problem. It's another housing project with high levels of violence, as in terms of the sort of surface temperature map, and lots of drug arrests in blue here that hadn't really achieved very much. So they went out and had a much better understanding of where all the people were driving around to pick up drugs. And after doing a long problem-oriented policing project, but combined with intelligence-led policing, because they did active interviewing of the offenders and of the drug users to understand exactly what was going on, they spent about $5,000 to put one of those in. That's all they did. But that was 1 year before they put in that roadblock. Red being bad, blue being good in terms of the change in violent crime. 1 year afterwards, and that's where they put it, by the way. 2 years afterwards, 3 years afterwards, 4 years afterwards, 5 years afterwards. That's the kind of investment I want from $5,000. That's money well spent, but it only works if you combine intelligence-led policing and active interviewing of offenders to understand what's going on, with the crime analysis to know where to focus all those activities, with a thought about a problem-oriented policing project to actually establish long-term crime prevention. So we're pondering that in Camden, but here's where it can go wrong. Here's a street that they decided, okay, there's a drug market in the street, we'll make it a one-way street instead of a two-way street. Thought it was a good idea? Well, maybe, but out of all these drug markets, it's the one that I would have chosen the least. Because post hoc afterwards, they asked us to look at it, and we discovered that out of all the drug markets in Camden, it was the one where 91% of the people arrested for drugs in the area were Camden residents. And they were travelling on average less than 1 mile. So they changed the traffic pattern for a drug market that everybody was walking to. Much better if they'd done it up here in East Camden, where only 70% of the people arrested for drugs were Camden residents, and they were travelling on average 2 miles. There's a lot of thought in this, but I've run out of time. If you're interested in more, spend $27 on Amazon on a book that I'll get about $1 from royalties, so I don't care whether you buy it or not, because I can't even buy a flipping coffee at Starbucks for that. But come to jratliff.net if you want to download some PowerPoint slides that support the book and some of the other bits and pieces. And I think I'm done, because I've run out of time. So, thank you very much.
To your community or to you as a police chief. Number 2, how information sharing and technology can serve as a catalyst to really dramatically reduce crime in your area. And then the third one, which is where I'm going to get to, I'm going to zip through the NSI slides pretty quickly, but there's a case study that elaborates a little bit more about New Jersey, kind of from the police officer's perspective. I don't know if any of you, how many have been to the Rock before? Oh, just a few people, okay. So the Regional Operation and Intelligence Center in New Jersey. And it so happens Tom OReilly in our office kind of helped, while he was still with the Attorney General's office in New Jersey, helped design that, work with Rick Fuentes. And if you're ever in that part of the country, I would encourage you to schedule a stop by there and see them. Ray Gadetti. How many people know Ray Gadetti? A handful. Ray, this case study is really Pat McCurdy's version of Ray Gadetti's 5 secrets to success. NSI, it is what law enforcement has been doing forever as far as taking tips and leads, but simply doing it in a concise, consistent manner that is unified across all of the country. Right now there are 12 pilot sites. There's a batter's box. Within 24 months, we hope to have the entire country up and running with NSI. It really leverages fusion centers, and my address really today is to help encourage you to use fusion centers. Again, LA has been doing great work. Matter of fact, NSI, the SAR initiative, between Chief Bratton and Commander Tony McNamara and other folks around the country, everything I'm talking about today was developed by police and practitioners for police and practitioners. BJA plays this facilitator role, but this really is good work done from folks in the street. Why does it matter? Everyone is aware of these continued attempts to have terrorist attacks in the country. The main piece of this is that we're seeing the frequency is there's an uptick. We're also seeing more and more that maybe at one time when some people thought, well, what's the face of terrorism? Well, it can be anybody's face. More and more can be a homegrown person that leans. But many of these folks still have overseas financing and support. Part of this NSI, we first were approached and asked if we could help support the development of this program. We thought it was a technology program. There's just a small technology portion, but there is a solution that enables this. Oftentimes when you talk with folks in the field or analysts, they say, oh, I want to get rid of single sign-on. I've got to sign on here. I've got to use a different password and sign on here for this database. what folks really are asking for is what we call federated query. They want to be able to ask one question about a person, place, license plate, whatever, and it automatically query appropriate databases. And that's what this, what the NSI is able to do. Kind of like Google. Google for law enforcement. And of course, this either through Leo, RIS, or HIS and Intel, you can access. And then that federated search, at this point, this represents DHS, Leo, and all of the SAR participants. Boston, LA I mentioned, Las Vegas, been doing some good work. So these are the current participants. Positive outcomes. Well, as I mentioned, we thought this was a technology initiative. Really, it's a policy and a training initiative. So we help develop policy that enables, I want to say, in LA, it really doesn't require much of a change in paperwork for a person on the street. Is it in LA where it just adds one checkbox that if you're doing an incident report, if an officer says, and this may be a SAR, check. And then it goes to analysts that are trained as gatekeepers to say, oh, does this have a nexus to terrorism, a possible nexus, based on behaviors of past terrorist attacks? This is behaviors based. And so we have policy in place that includes protection of privacy and civil liberties. And there is a great roll call DVD that is going to be coming soon to a theater near you. ICP and all the NSI partners helped develop it. But in a nutshell, it explains the heart of this program. Again, addressing, looking at behaviors, precursor activity that has led to terrorist activities. Highlighted accomplishments, building communities of trust. Who's from Boston? Boston here? Okay. I know I'm OReilly. We've got another segmented program where we also, with NSI, go to jurisdictions and help do what the morning session when I walked in, how do you get the ethnic groups and other folks kind of to participate, understand what the police department's trying to do, etc. There is, BJA is actually the host for a new joint program management office for this rollout. And they're moving in about 2 weeks. A couple FBI agents, a couple DHS folks, a couple of state and local folks yet to be determined. So if you have any good folks you want to send to Washington, let us know. There's a battle box of new states. Alabama, California, Connecticut, Georgia, Indiana, Minnesota, New Jersey, Ohio, South Carolina, Tennessee is here, right? Tennessee, etc. The list actually, we thought this might take 3 years, but after a lot of analysis and looking at resources, we're going to do it in 2. This is what I really want to talk about today. Again, these are my words. Ray Gadetti's thoughts are kind of my words. What I just call New Jersey's smart policing model. This is what they call the best violent enterprise source targeting initiative. And started out as a couple of sites, and today 6 sites in New Jersey are active participants. The best program itself has about 20 different agencies, federal agencies, state, local, etc., that participate. And the objective is to identify violent offenders and take appropriate action. 5 secrets to success. I say powered, in my words, powered by New Jersey's ROC, Regional Operations and Information Center. So you've got a fusion center that's kind of like powered by Intel, it's your computer. Well, this is this initiative powered by the fusion center analysts, working with everyone. Ray thinks, much like Jerry said, these 5 success factors, don't think of them in a linear fashion. They're not in any particular order. And I would kind of creates, it's not done correctly. But in New Jersey, it's done correctly, and here's what I'll tell you why. So this process allows the chief to be empowered and really kind of be the main facilitator, sounding board, etc. And why is that important? Well, as Ray says, the state police come into the metropolitan area, and the feds come in, and they make arrests, and they get 5-5s, and they're gone. Well, the chief or the sheriff, they're stuck. They're there. They've got the court docket, the jails, the community reaction to the program, etc. So they really do play a primary leadership role. Data-driven analysis. In New Jersey, they've got what's called Project Watchtower. And let me just share a little bit. Embedded within Project Watchtower are a host of applications that include New Jersey Pop, which is a virtual collection tool that analyzes shooting hit data, location, victim, suspect information, weapons recovered, motivation, etc., to help identify and deploy resources. New Jersey Tag, targeting activities of gangs aimed at the most prolific, dangerous offenders, really looks at the propensity of violence, gang affiliations, criminal associations, etc. Again, and has some predictive capability within that application. New Jersey Trace, we sometimes refer to it as E-Trace. It's with ATF, BJA, and other activities that help really track crime weapons. And I think 80% of the weapons used in crime in New Jersey come from out of state. So it looks at this whole picture. And Crime Track as well. Crime Track is a virtual platform that allows officers throughout New Jersey to talk with one another, share case information. Common operating picture. For much of the U.S., it's just not the traditional British model. So agencies have, they kind of have done their own thing. They've got their own investigations. Where does that come into a rub? Well, when other departments have the same targets and don't know it, and they're both working it, what's that do? Pisses people off, because they're trying to arrest the same guy, but there's no coordination. Under this model, under this smart policing model, just imagine the aperture of a camera being made wide open, so that when all of the agencies are working collectively and together in joint investigations, joint arrest teams, everything in a collaborative spirit, then you can do things when they identify one of the #1 public enemies in New Jersey who disappears for a while, but they learn that he's over in Pennsylvania now creating havoc. It helps Pennsylvania learn real quickly all the history and all the background that's needed. Tasks, assignments, and coordination. Ray calls this tasking and assignments. And he says this is the missing ingredient in the U.S. tradition. That's where, again, I mentioned earlier, now when an arrest team goes out, it's an FBI agent, it's maybe DEA, it's a local sheriff, and a local city officer. So, again, working together. The last secret to success, CompStat, I term that the next generation of CompStat, a venue. In New Jersey, it's a positive bi-monthly meeting where everybody comes together and reviews activity. And Ray says, and this fits right in with Jerry's dialogue, that for the first time, analysts are in a room with decision makers and policy makers, and they are all engaging one another to look at the analysis, to see if it's correct, to see if there are other options. This goes beyond law enforcement to include code enforcement, other members of the community get engaged. But the so what factor of fusion centers and the importance of data-driven policing in one of the best cities, and I apologize because I don't have, I don't recall which one it is, but the results that have occurred from 2007 and 2008 statistics, homicides reduced by 42%, pretty big number. Aggravated assault reduced by 93%, and shootings reduced by 18%. So that's what it's all about. And again, I know a lot of good work is being done in other places around the country, and BJ is proud to be working with the NSI program, with these other programs that are addressing these needs. If you have any questions, I appreciate your time today.